Hello, thank you very much for the invitation. I'd like to thank the Art Nouveau Network and Urban Brussels for putting together this wonderful conference. There's many possibilities for me to piggyback on the earlier talks. So you've already seen the first building by Josef Maria Olbrich, the Secessionist building, and the Macintosh School. So many topics will intertwine with what I will be speaking about today. The surface above, I will be presenting a methodological approach to many restorations on the Mathildenhöhe in Darmstadt. The Darmstadt Mathildenhöhe is an ensemble of buildings and artworks on the highest elevation to the east of the city of Darmstadt. Just roughly show you that this area roughly was the exhibition grounds of 4 building exhibitions from 1901 to 1914. There were 4 major exhibitions. There's one satellite to the World Heritage Site right here. It's a group of 3 houses built by Josef Maria Olbrich. So this section and about roughly this section, that forms the UNESCO World Heritage Site Mathildenhöhe Darmstadt. We were inscribed on the World Heritage List in the year 2021. We had been working on the World Heritage application for over 10 years. And much of what I will be speaking about today has to do with the advice we received from an international advisory board that accompanied our World Heritage application and accompanied all the restoration works that have taken place since we tried to get on the list, which we then successfully did. So I, of course, will not be presenting all of the restoration works that we've done in the last years, but I will focus on the exhibition hall and the house Olbrich that is hidden behind these trees. But I can just tell you that there's also the house Deitas and the large Glückert house have also been restored, and there are new restoration projects that we will tackle in the coming years. The UNESCO and, of course, ICOMOS and our advisory board are really interested that there's an overall strategy for restorations on a World Heritage Site. So we were advised that we shouldn't put together a puzzle of many different restoration concepts, but that we should have an overall plan for the restorations taking place on the Mathildenhöhe. And that's something we have then established in coordination with the advisory board. And the basis we'd like to now call is the Zeitschichtenmodell. So it's a model of chronological layers. And today I would like to present to you this model, and I'd be really interested, maybe perhaps the coming days, to also speak with you about this, because I think it's closer to the Venice Charter than it is to the Turin Declaration. In my view, sort of the Turin Declaration, which still is not very well known. This is something where I know the Art Nouveau Network plans to disseminate this declaration in the coming years. And I find it very fascinating that there's such a Turin Declaration specifically for Art Nouveau architecture and heritage. And in my view, when we combine this declaration with the Venice Charter, we have a spectrum of possibilities that are plausible for the restoration of World Heritage or of heritage in general. And I think what I will present today is more on the spectrum towards the Venice Charter. But this is something I'd love to discuss also in the coming days. Just because not everyone knows the Mathildenhöhe Darmstadt, I, of course, briefly want to present the Mathildenhöhe to you to help also you understand how we came about to put together the strategy of the chronological layers. And everything goes back to the Grand Duke Ernst Ludwig, who was the grandson of Queen Victoria, but grew up in Darmstadt. He was the last Grand Duke of Darmstadt-Hessen, the state of Hessen, and he traveled the world and was very inspired by contemporary art and contemporary design. He was a young duke who furnished his new palace in the middle of Darmstadt with a huge design by Bailey Scott. So it's quite impressive that a German Grand Duke surrounds himself very openly with contemporary art and design and international contemporary art and design, not with German design. This is something that's very fascinating about Ernst Ludwig, that he was never nationalistic. We just heard that in the Museum of Applied Arts in Budapest, there's specifically Lechner wanted to create something that was Hungarian. And we have that, we know this of many countries around the time before the First World War. Also, of course, the World Exhibitions, it was also always, there was a little bit of a nationalistic approach to say, our country is very progressive, very special, and they present this speciality in exhibitions. And I think what's so fascinating about Art Nouveau that it combines so many cultures, and this is something that Ernst Ludwig, the Grand Duke, really understood, because who did he decide that should be the main architect? Not a German architect, an Austrian architect, Josef Maria Olbrich. And Josef Maria Olbrich did not create an exhibition of German architecture, but already here we can say it was the direction of international architecture. It's something very important. He did not try to establish a certain German style or even incorporate German characteristics of architecture into his buildings. He really let his imagination run free. Here you see a plan of the first exhibition on the Mathildenhöhe around the Ernst Ludwig house, the house of Ernst Ludwig, which was the seat or the studio building and exhibition building of the artist colony, and Olbrich built his house right to the southeast of that. This is another plan from 1908. I just wanted to show you that there are 4 plans of the 4 large exhibitions between 1901 and 1914 that shaped the Mathildenhöhe, and we overlaid these 4 plans to create the property of the World Heritage Site. As you can imagine, UNESCO wants to know exactly what are the perimeters of a World Heritage Site, and this is something we did. As most of you know, for every World Heritage Site, there has to be an outstanding universal value. This is something that is part of every World Heritage Site, and I will just run through them, that these are certain so-called attributes of the World Heritage Site Mathildenhöhe Darmstadt. It's a groundbreaking early 20th century ensemble. That means it has iconic pieces of architecture, works of architecture that influenced many architects worldwide. It was the forerunner of permanent international building exhibitions. This was not like a World's Fair with temporary structures, but sure enough, these buildings were meant to last. They were permanent structures. It has a unique and influential silhouette defining the city's identity. We can even speak about the Bilbao effect, that a culture site becomes a space of identification for a city, a space that is not religious or political, but cultural. And of course, the emergence of the international style, as I stated. And last but not least, a site of universal culture and spirituality. I'd just like to run through that. The iconic buildings, of course, the wedding tower built by the city of Darmstadt for Ernst Ludwig for his second wedding, and a tower that still is being researched on its influence. It was built, the first designs were actually around 1900, but then for this specific design by Olbrich, we can say it's between 1905 and 1908. And as you see in this important book by Pevsner, I did not highlight this. This is actually the cover of the book. And here we have the Macintosh School, of course, another nice link to a previous talk today. The factory building by Gropius on the right, and of course the Eiffel Tower. We also learned in the process of becoming a World Heritage Site, we did, of course, lots of research and had an international conference in 2016, which many of the RAN also participated in. And we also came about this amazing quote by Frank Lloyd Wright, who truly visited the Mathildenhöhe and wanted to meet Olbrich, who he admired greatly, as we know, only to find that 1909 Olbrich had already died. But why did Frank Lloyd Wright specifically come to Germany? He wanted to publish his architectural works in the Wasmuth portfolios, because Olbrich previously, around the year 1900, had published all of his works in the publishing house Wasmut in Berlin. And nowadays, the Wasmut portfolio by Frank Lloyd Wright is very sought after. It's an amazing document. And we come across this tower in Oklahoma, which clearly has some inspiration from the Wedding Tower. And of course, Frank Lloyd Wright could see Olbrich in St. Louis in the World's Fair in 1904, where Olbrich built a very large structure and won a gold medal, and was actually included in the Association of American Architects. It is the first international building exhibition with permanent structures, and here you can see them being built side by side. The artist colony arrived in Darmstadt, handpicked by the Grand Duke in the year 1899. In the fall, they are all in Darmstadt. And in the May 1901, this exhibition opened. So not even 2 years, all the houses were built for the 1901 exhibition, and everything you saw inside had been designed specifically for these houses and were able to be purchased. This is something that's very important, that this commercial aspect of these exhibitions, these were not unique artist studios which had an amazing budget, as we know in Barcelona or other houses. These were buildings that were built together with companies, and the artist colony was supposed to generate income by the sale of the works that were displayed there, but displayed just as you would see these objects in a living quarter. You basically could go into the house of Olbrich, see what cups he drinks out of, every curtain, every music instrument, everything had been produced for the house and was you could purchase it. Very important point. It was opened in 1901 in May with a huge procession, and this was not a religious opening. This was really an early form of performance art. Peter Behrens, who I will speak about shortly, he designed and created this opening ceremony, which was quite something. A crystal was brought out of the Ernst Ludwig House, presented to the Grand Duke as a symbol of the new times. Art Nouveau, new times, new art. This was all the spirit of the time that combines our many heritage sites. Today, this Ernst Ludwig House is the Artist Colony Museum. And what I find really interesting, the earlier talk, the Secession building has these laurel wreaths to the left and right. So this is the same architect, Josef Maria Olbrich. He built his secessionist building in Vienna. Grand Duke Ernst Ludwig saw drawings of that, and based on those drawings, he summoned Olbrich, or had him come to Darmstadt, and told Olbrich that he can build a whole small city on the Mathildenhöhe. And that's what drew Olbrich to come to Darmstadt. And here we have several continuations, one could say, of the secessionist building with these wreaths. But for us, very important is these white parts of the facade. This is the southern facade with the white render and only very few ornamentations. And I will speak about that one more time, but already in this point of the talk, we also have the distinction of being the missing link between the 19th century of typical Art Nouveau and the 20th century with the movement towards reduction of ornament towards the international style. You can see that wonderfully here on the Ernst Ludwig House. Inside the Ernst Ludwig House, here you see the studio of Olbrich. They just sent out designs for companies in the region, and they were then manufactured and sold and presented, of course, in exhibitions. Today, this Ernst Ludwig House is our, as I mentioned, artist colony house, where we can present products and works of art that were actually made or designed in the building, not made, designed in the building. I mentioned the Bilbao effect, or this highest elevation. Bruno Taut, the important architect, he created this, the term of the city crown, die Stadtkrone, and this is something that Ernst Ludwig and Olbrich really succeeded in. Today it's the symbol of Darmstadt, and it's viewable from many parts of the city and the region. And of course, this is all the buffer zone of the World Heritage Site. This is all protected. These sight lines cannot be disturbed. I mentioned Frank Lloyd Wright, and some people come to the Mathildenhöhe and think this must be 1920s, but no, this is 1901. This is the eastern facade of the Ernst Ludwig House. It's quite striking that the ornamentation on this side is just basically 3 lines, and something definitely that Olbrich saw already in the year 1901 when this house was published in the Wasmut Mappen and disseminated through magazines. The large Glückert house, which has also been restored and now open to the public on weekends, was the site of the furniture company Glückert. The Haus Deitas, this is all 1901, incredibly modern form of the time. And this is what I'd like to show, our missing link. As you know, the World Heritage List is growing and growing, and the UNESCO and ICOMOS sent out a study filling the gaps. And now the UNESCO demands that a new World Heritage Site should fill a gap. So it shouldn't be a city center, it shouldn't be another church, it should really fill a gap. And at the time of our nomination, there were not many sites of the 20th century. That's one gap we could fill. And we fill this wonderful gap of the Casa Vicens by Gaudí in Barcelona. So of course there's World Heritage, Art Nouveau on the World Heritage List, of course Gaudí and Horta, but the missing link towards the 20th century with the houses of the Bauhaus, here the Gropius house in Dessau. This is where the Mathildenhöhe comes into place and really brings the 19th century, connects the 19th century with the 20th century as the missing link. And as we will see, Gropius was heavily inspired by the Mathildenhöhe. Here you see the house of Josef Miro Olbrich, which I'm going to present to you as a restoration project. And here, just please see the flat roof, which is quite amazing for the year 1901. And this was an influence Olbrich received at when he was traveling in Tunisia and saw these cubicle houses. And of course, this is something we associate with the 1920s and with Bauhaus. Peter Behrens is another part of this missing link. An Art Nouveau artist, he came to the Mathildenhöhe as a painter. He was supposed to paint. He didn't paint a single painting. He was so inspired by Olbrich, by the Mathildenhöhe, the possibilities that as a self-taught architect, he built his very first house. And later, of course, built and created the whole corporate identity for AEG and these manufacturing buildings, which are also on the World Heritage List. And as many of you know, Peter Behrens was the teacher of many of the most important architects of the 20th century, Mies van der Rohe, Walter Gropius, and Le Corbusier, who also studied with him, worked for him, Adolf Meyers, and many others. And this is another part of the missing link, where Walter Gropius then formed the Bauhaus, and Mies van der Rohe, of course, was another Bauhaus director in the later years. But what is still quite amazing to find out is that Gropius was supposed to be a member of the artist colony in 1910, but we don't know why that didn't come about. And last point of the OUV is a site of international spirituality. It's quite remarkable. I was telling you about the nationalistic tendencies before the First World War that were also very strong in Germany with the Kaiser. Ernst Ludwig always had an international perspective, and he let Bernhard Höttger, this amazing sculptor, create a homage to Hinduism, to Buddhism on the Mathildenhöhe in a sculpture garden, and incorporated many texts of the Bhagavad Gita. And this is, I think, specifically remarkable shortly before the year 1914. So we have much authenticity. That's something we also spoke about. Professor Godoli mentioned it with the Nara document of UNESCO. We could have a lot of conversations. What is authenticity? It's a very, very complicated topic. But I just want to say, in the classical sense of authenticity, we have the wonderful mosaics, we have lots of authenticity, but we also have a lot of works that have been lost or destroyed in the Second World War. The house of Hans Christiansen used to stand here. This is a fountain by Karl Hartung and Otto Bartning from the year 1958. it was actually right here in Brussels. The World Heritage, the World's Fair in Brussels, 1958. It stood underneath the German pavilion. So this is a piece of Brussels on the Mathildenhöhe. And this house here is the house I mentioned of Josef Maria Olbrich. So the private house of Olbrich that was built for the first exhibition and was open during the first exhibition for people to walk around. And we have many, many photographs of the interior from the year 1901, because also, as was mentioned in a previous talk today, Alexander Koch, the big publisher in Darmstadt, who had this wonderful competition, House for an Art Lover, that Alexander Koch, he was from Darmstadt, and he accompanied all the exhibitions on the Mathildenhöhe with his magazines, with amazing photographs. So, this house today, it belongs to the city of Darmstadt. I didn't mention yet, these houses were built by the artists themselves. They had a promise to be finished in time for the opening of the exhibition. But after that, they could keep the ground, they could keep the plot of land, and later on, they, of course, were able to sell it. So nowadays, half of the elements, half of the buildings of the Mathildenhöhe are privately owned, half belong to the city of Darmstadt. So this belongs to the city of Darmstadt and houses the Academy for Literature and Poetry. So this is not open to the public, and it was restored because there was a lot of need for repairs. And there was lots of discussions what to do with this house. Before the restoration, this was all closed. And these steps, as you can see, of course, are not original, are not authentic. These were created to open the house as it was meant to be to this forum to the south of the Ernst Ludwig House. And that's one of the very few reconstructions that were done on the Mathildenhöhe to help understand the design of this house. Now, this might be shocking to you, but this is something that is quite a stark contrast. This is how the building looked in the year 1901, and you have to know that this house, up to these frieze of ceramics, was all destroyed in the Second World War. There are many losses. I mentioned the house of Hans Christiansen was heavily damaged in the Second World War, and this house too. And many people in the city of Darmstadt said, if we do any work on this house, why don't we reconstruct the whole work? And this is where I spoke earlier. Do we follow more strictly the Venice Charter, or do we open ourselves to the Turin Declaration? This is something that was discussed with ICOMOS, with our advisory board, and they clearly said, don't do any reconstructions that aren't necessary. And we could, of course, argue what is necessary, what is not necessary. But the model, and this is what I'm presenting today, of the chronological layers, is that we decided to go back always to the last chronological layer of a building that is of high quality. And this is in line with Article 11 of the Treaty of the Charter of Venice, where it says every layer of a house has to be respected, because every layer of a building, of a monument, tells a story. And of course, in this case, this chronological layer tells the story of the Second World War, that there were strong damages, and it didn't seem plausible that this should just be erased, especially in a country that started the Second World War, that everything should look as if nothing happened in the last 123 years. This was something that was not acceptable, was not advised, again, by an international advisory board, and this led to this decision to go back to the last phase and to really focus on what is authentic. And this links me to the great talk about Budapest. These are tiles from Zsolnay, from Hungary. Again, there were, as you know, I'm sure there are many tile companies in Germany, Villeroy and Boch and Geil and many other, but Olbrich said only Zsolnay in 1901 can make these wonderful tiles that are quite large, have a wonderful relief, and are really, there's a characteristic brushstroke. You can see how the glaze was applied. So the whole restoration work of this house, which was almost completely destroyed in the Second World War, was to really focus on authenticity, focus what's real, and really make that stand out. We tried to, these are all authentic tiles. We needed a few replicas, and it was impossible, I have to say. We tried and tried, we came very close now, and Venice Charter also says that it should still be discernible what is authentic and what has been reconstructed. But I was just amazed to find and see that with today's technology and know-how, the recipes have been lost. Also in Jolnai, the company still exists. The recipes have been lost, the know-how, the craftsmanship. We can get very, very close, but still the original, in many, many cases, we can't 100% achieve the quality that Olbrich designed and wanted. And if we speak about an autographical work of art, as Mr. Godoli this morning said, with Olbrich we can really state that. He was hands-on, he was he's involved in all the processes of working, that I think it's extremely respectful to say certain things we can't reconstruct. We can maybe come close, but never get there 100%. So that's the concept for the Josef Maria Olbrich house again. There are some grids, some elements that are still original. As I mentioned, the most destructions are above the frieze. The second of the two restoration works I want to present is the exhibition hall. We just opened the house after over 10 years of works. It cost 30 million euros. It was very complicated because of Corona during this time, the COVID pandemic, but also because we were trying to become a World Heritage Site parallel to restoration works. So everything we did, we first discussed with the advisory board, so we don't lessen our chances to become a World Heritage Site. The exhibition hall sits on a water reservoir. That's why you can see this is all water reservoir, and on top of that, Josef Maria Olbrich built the exhibition hall. I'd just like you to focus on this area. This, as you can see in this historical photo, used to be a rose garden. That's how Olbrich intended it to be. It's hard to see here, but so this was a courtyard of 3 halls. You can see that here, 1, 2, 3 halls. And this was a courtyard that, after the destructions during the Second World War, was covered and became a 4th exhibition hall. And it was covered after 45, so the Parliament of Darmstadt could have sessions in this building because the city center was practically completely destroyed. So this was, again, should we take this down because of the Declaration of Turin, for example, and say, this has nothing to do with Olbrich, he wanted a courtyard here, or do we keep it because it tells a lot about Darmstadt, it tells about the Second World War, it tells about the rebirth of Darmstadt inspired by the Mathildenhöhe, and has been very, very practical for our exhibitions. Something I personally, I curate exhibitions in the building, I would not want to miss this hall. But this is immediately where we have to discuss what belongs to a building. We think all these chronological layers tell a story and are important. But this goes against the idea to say, is it an autographical building and we just follow Olbrich from 1908, which also would be difficult because in 1908, this part of the terrace didn't exist. This was only done 1914 when Olbrich had died, but it was still part of the artist colony. So I can't get into too deep. It's very complicated, but I just wanted to tell you the decisions. So we went to the last chronological layer of quality, and that was this hall number 4 of the exhibition hall, and restored that. If we go to the eastern side, you will see windows wrapped around. This is before the Second World War, a photo. something that Olbrich didn't want. The city forced him to put all these windows in. Olbrich, of course, knew an exhibition hall can't have windows all over. Otherwise, we can't hang paintings, exhibit works. So the first exhibitions that Olbrich oversaw, from the inside, these windows were also covered. This exhibition hall, again, was also heavily damaged in the Second World War. You see these window openings all around. And in the 1970s, they were all closed because in that restoration of the 1970s, they said, we don't need sunlight in these halls, we were going to close them up. And they completely boarded them up with filled them up with bricks. And we took down the render from the 1970s and found also some ornaments that was very hard to decipher if this was actually designed by Olbrich or by an architect who helped complete the work during the building because Olbrich died in the year 1908. This is something that we are still researching, but to come to the solution is that we actually restored this rendering from the 1970s. And the rendering from the 1970s that first of all closed the windows, but also this structure has nothing to do with what was underneath, but it follows this drawing from 1905, 1906 of Josef Maria Olbrich. This is exactly how he envisioned the work before he was forced by the city of Darmstadt to have windows in these two eastern halls. And we assume that when he was forced to do these windows, he actually didn't design these windows. But this is something still up for debate. But the very complicated point I'm trying to make is that when you visit the Mathildenhöhe now and you see these two facades, they do go back to the year 1901, but the last chronological layer is from the 1970s. I hope that's understandable. It's maybe a little bit difficult. But this is following our model of chronological layers. And we decided with the advisory board that the 1970s decision to create this rendering structure based on this is of high quality, and that's what was then reconstructed. I'm open for a discussion later I'm trying to make that clear. What was new, however, was these windows that had been closed in the 1970s. They had been closed on this side. And we did open them to help, again, understand the building, that the eastern slope of the Mathildenhöhe was always also exhibition grounds, and these windows that we can now open or close are a missing link to the eastern slope, where also the entrance to the Ernst Ludwig House is. This was done by the architects Schneider and Schumacher, again, with many, many discussions. I'm just trying to give you a sense of the complexity of these questions, and they were fierce debates, I can say, especially regarding these windows, which were designed by the architect firm Schneider and Schumacher, which don't have any interior structures. They're just complete large glazing, symbolizing a chronological layer of 2024. Here you can see how they were when built. They had these interior structures. Coming back to the western side, you will see crammed between the exhibition hall and the wedding tower this structure that combines these two striking elements. And over the course of the decades, this building was very often torn down, renewed, and before the current restoration, there was from the 1970s this tract for offices and some work studios, and the rain was leaking into the structure, so it was clear that it would be cheaper to build something new than to restore this structure from the 1970s, which we did not regard as a high-quality chronological layer. And that's where the architect firm Schneider Schumacher, which I find very good, and this also follows the Venice Charter, that new structures can be taken down and something new can be created if they do not overpower the other structures there. And this glass box clearly gives more space, also visual integrity to the wedding tower and to the exhibition hall. And this is something that we also can use wonderfully with the Institut Mathildenhöhe. But I think this is a great addition and improvement to the 1970s. Again, based on many discussions with the advisory board. And last but not least, the water reservoir that I already showed you, the entrance to it has been redesigned to a new cafe restaurant, because the cafe restaurant that used to be in the exhibition hall was not wheelchair accessible, and now we have a wheelchair accessible restaurant and cafe, which is a standard, I think, or clearly a standard for a modern museum. Why the restoration took place in the first place was that this exhibition hall had technology from the 1970s. We could not receive large loans anymore because we could not fulfill the requirements of having 20 degrees Celsius plus minus 2 degrees, or a humidity level of 50% plus minus 5%. And this is something that was very impressively integrated into the exhibition hall without altering the shape of the exhibition hall. It uses the water reservoir as a means to store heat in the summer and, of course, draw the heat in the winter times. And now it's a fully renovated exhibition hall with 1,000 square meters. Some of the ceilings are 10 meters high. We opened the exhibition hall without any artworks, without an exhibition, during the UNESCO World Heritage Day in Germany. And we had thousands of people come just to see the empty exhibition hall. And it's important to say this is how Olbrich envisioned it. It was a form of white cube. I don't like the word white cube that much, but it was the intention of Olbrich to create a huge flexibility of possible exhibitions with these 3 halls, and now today with 4 halls. And we could integrate a lot of technology into the floor that we can also set up video art and many other improvements. Currently, this is a look into the current exhibition on artworks from the Municipal Art Collection that present stories through the artworks of paintings and sculptures, and we locate them on the map of Darmstadt with this floor grid. This is a piano made for the first exhibition, or during the first exhibition, the piano of Alexander Koch, made by Patritz Huber. Of course, the house of Hans Christiansen is also a chapter in the exhibition. So we opened the exhibition in September. We had 30,000 people come over the course of 3 days, and are happy that it's finally open. And of course, I welcome you to come to the Mathildenhöhe soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.